What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? Their dogs got into my backyard and attacked my dog. My dog ended up okay, but it was a long recovery, and he still doesn't walk right. He wasn't as the happiest dog ever, so to see him on the ground, covered in blood, was the worst thing ever. The dogs were able to get through because their kids had taken a plank out of my fence. They didn't have a fence. I left a letter on their door explaining the situation. They showed up at my door to tell me that it was my fault for not having a stronger fence and that they wouldn't be paying any medical bills. After a lot of them yelling and me calmly explaining why they actually would be paying, they eventually complied. They did build a fence backwards with the flat side facing them. They are also loud as fuck, got chickens that escape on a regular basis in our suburban neighborhood, and are overall scummy people. Lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11. Like loud. And until something like 7 AM. Maybe later, but that's when I would leave for work. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door, but they would never open the door. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point I found out they often left for a bar across the street, but would just leave the music on, so I would pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 AM and turn it back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done, so at some point I would jam their lock when they went out, so their keys wouldn't work anymore, and they had to get the property manager in while the music was blasting inside. After a couple of times of that happening, they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. Definitely the shithead 19-year-olds that lived next door to me when I was finishing up college, that screamed at Call of Duty at the top of their lungs through paper-thin walls every night when they got killed, who also threw a pumpkin on the roof of my car, causing $3K worth of damage, which is considered felony vandalism in Michigan. I finally got them to confess and basically gave him a stern talking to as a 22-year-old that was just done with college nonsense at that point, and told him I wasn't going to press charges as long as his insurance paid for it. Later that year, when his roommate was flipping out about Cody and yelled something along the lines of "Goddammit fucking hackers, everyone is fucking cheating, what the fuck is this bullshit, I hate this game, bunch of fucking losers and cheaters," which was very clear through my bedroom wall while I was studying, so I didn't hesitate, since it had been months of that, after he got done with his tantrum and said, "Sounds like you just suck at Cody, bro." I heard a crash of what sounded like a controller being banished to the shadow realm, and then didn't hear anything from him for a month. It was glorious. My drug dealing neighbor got murdered on the sidewalk in front of my house. Apartment building. The upstairs neighbor's dog peed on their patio, and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading. I yelled and ran to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in future, they said it wasn't their dog and it must have blown over from somewhere else. What? I have a few from the same neighbor who I'll call Linda. Linda would often have men outside the apartment building that she locked out screaming her name. But the best story regards a boyfriend Linda had who insisted my roommate and I call him the captain. About a week after meeting him, we came home to a wedding announcement for Linda and the captain. Yes, his name was the captain on the announcement. Exactly 1 week later still, the captain was arrested outside our apartment building for public intoxication at 2 AM while screaming, "I've made a huge mistake. Fuck you, Linda. A huge mistake. I'm ruined. I used to live in a horrible apartment with paper-thin walls. The people next door were a woman who looked like she was in her 70s and what I thought was her 30-something grandson. They would yell at each other all day, constantly blast their TV, and the smell of their cigarette smoke would waft through into my apartment and make the place absolutely reek. The worst was at night when the two of them would have loud sex, which is how I figured out they weren't related. Every night for an hour, creaking bed banging against my bedroom wall and the old woman moaning like a stuck pig. Nightmarish. I also think the guy kept track of my schedule and watched for me, because whenever I came home or went out, even when I took out the garbage, he would be there outside his place, trying to chit chat with me while staring at my body and being completely gross. Lived there a year, but it felt like 10. My current neighbors will randomly light bombshell fireworks in the middle of the night during the middle of the week, as if some of us don't have to wake up early for work. Also, when I was younger and living in a different city, our front neighbors stole our dog from our backyard one day, and we didn't find out it was them until a few months later when we saw our dog in their yard. They denied they stole it and wouldn't give it back to us until we got the police involved. I lived in an apartment with lot of rotating tenants, and elderly lady moved in across the hall from me, promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck/porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including, but not limited to, a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks I started to realize I hadn't seen her in a while and started to smell something real weird. Turns out she had died and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all her stuff about a week after that. This is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Martin work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out and then stole them when they were done. I rented a flat with an ex, and the upstairs neighbor was an absolute nightmare. Deadbeat dad who had his kid every weekend and left them screaming all the time. He'd blast music until sunrise every day, even when he had his kid. Got the council involved, nothing happened. Got child services involved, nothing happened. He used to argue every Sunday with his ex about how he wasn't paying child support. They'd argue right outside our door. We were on the ground floor. The guy was unemployed, owed the landlord a lot of money, and only left his flat to get groceries or drugs. He kicked off at me because my cat meowed loudly once. They were crackheads. They had 2 kids, were physically and verbally abusive to each other, and were hoarders on top of it. Tried calling Child Protective Services and the police over and over, and was never taken seriously. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damage to the rest of the apartment building because they were cooking meth. We had to move out, as did many others. The silver lining is that they finally got their kids taken away after that. I used to live in a house that was split into 2 apartments. My neighbors had the lower half, and I learned we had issues with the HVAC when their cigarette smoke came visibly pouring out our registers, stank up everything we owned. Then one of them stole my car. Dude pretended to be a reverend, but was actually just a filthy fucking hoarder. He insisted on wearing sandals all of the time, and whenever he left his flat, the entire stairwell would stink of century-old unwashed feet. Eventually, the beetles that had infested his flat crawled up and into our kitchen and then everywhere. Took months to get him evicted. Fuck that guy. Moved into a crappy apartment in a building that was occupied by basically the worst people in the area. Pretty rural small town. Junkies, alcoholics, etc. I moved there because I don't have a driver's license and I needed to live close to my new job at a cafe. No buses in the area except school buses, and it was relatively cheap. Anyways, one night when I came home from work, I met 2 of my neighbors by the entrance to the building. These 2 were living wall to wall with me, and I had listened to their drugged up saturnalias more than once. They started following me up the stairs, not saying a single word, just following me. I rush inside and lock the door when they start hammering at it, yelling, hammering their hands at the door so hard I thought they would break it. I yelled back at them, "WHAT the fuck do you want? Leave me alone." They stopped their hammering, and the man said, with a fragile voice, "We were just wondering if we could borrow your pee for a drug test tomorrow." I not so politely declined, told them to fuck off, and called the police. Didn't live there for much longer, I'll tell you that. Had one that would basically steal our mail and other stuff from our porch and yard. Caught her once to confront her, and she started yelling at me to stop attacking her, and tried to say I was stealing her stuff. Ended up with the police getting called and us filing a restraining order against her. Edit, a word. My neighbors create this toxic smoke out of their chimney. We suspect that they are making drugs. I've posted this before. Our neighbor was tossing bags of her vomit into my yard for about a year. Like 50 bags. Called the cops. Turns out she had an eating disorder she was hiding from her parents. Edit. Seems like I sparked a bit of a eating disorder group therapy. Having witnessed just how far someone will go to hide their disorder, I hope this post and my past story can help one person get help before they go this far. Be strong. Be better. My neighbor once shot both my dogs and his goat and made me bury both. One dog survived thankfully. He then tried to make us pay for a new goat claiming that our dogs attacked it. The goat had bullet wounds and no bite marks. I have a schizophrenic neighbor that has believed for years that I'm hacking his electronic devices, scanning his phone, harassing/terrorizing him, etc. Over the years he has claimed I've held an old man hostage in my condo, allowed blood to drip from my patio to his, and that I'm a terrible racist. He leaves notes on the inside of his car accusing me of these things.